Go on.
Okay, this is a short instructional video on how to check your tone arm. In particular, the freedom of the bearings. What can happen with a tone arm, particularly as it gets elderly, is that the bearings can get what you call stiction, or they can start sticking at various points. So you've got the two degrees of movement on the tone arm. You've got the vertical movement and you've also got the horizontal movement. We're going to check both of those, but if there's something wrong with either of those forms of movement, you can get what you call sticking points on the record. In other words, it'll start mistracking at the same point every time. If that's happening, it's usually a sure sign that the horizontal movement is got a sticking point in the bearing, and we need to check that. You can get mistracking sometimes caused by vertical movement, but that's much less common. Okay, so the first thing to do to check your bearings is to make sure that the counterweight is adjusted to a point that it will float the arm. Okay, so in other words, there's zero downforce on the arm. Now I've left the starless guard on in this case because for this particular test we don't want to be causing damage to your starless. Okay, so I've got a pretty good balance here. The arm, as you can see, is just about floating free. It's got a slight tendency to go upwards, but it's not very strong. So I'm just going to very lightly nip the counterweight here. You don't need to really do it up tight because all we're doing at the moment is testing the freedom of the bearings. Okay, so what I like to do now is just see how free the thing is to go over the record. It's got quite a strong outward pull at the moment, as you can imagine, because it's actually got the side bias coming into play here, and that's what's causing that. So I'm just going to detach the side bias for the time being, and that means we've got a lot more. It's a lot easier to see what's going on. There's a very slight tendency, as you can see, and this is what you call residual twist. Most arms have it. Very few arms will just stay stationary in the same place because what you've got is the cable, the internal wiring which goes down the arm is going through the pivot point, and that almost invariably has a slight twist on it. That's nothing to be worried about. It's perfectly natural. Because these arms are incredibly free, they glide at the slightest bit of side force. The fact that it has a slight sideward tendency to come outwards isn't a problem because that's what you want the side bias to do anyway, and it just means you need to apply slightly less side bias than you would normally. Okay, but as you can see, it floats freely across the record in both directions without any kind of notchiness. Okay, there's no kind of sticking. If this was a notchy arm, it would sort of suddenly, it would go like that and then suddenly just stop, just suddenly, because there's obviously a notch in the bearing somewhere. Okay, so that's that side. We've checked that. Now the vertical thing, you can generally see that it's very free. This arm is just nicely balanced. It's no notchiness. When you actually hold on to the finger lift and move it up and down, that's again a very good indicator of whether you're going to feel the notchiness. If it's sort of suddenly a little bit sticky at some point, then you know that there's a bit of friction on the bearing there and it's notchy. This one feels absolutely even all the way through. The other trick for telling whether it's got a bit of stiffness on the vertical bearing is to increase the weight, the tracking force, down to about the 2 gram force region, and if the bearing is free it should just bounce nicely. Can you see it's bouncing? Alright, that's a pretty good sign that it's free. If you've got a stiff bearing it tends to just drop and stay there. It doesn't bounce up because there's too much friction holding it down. Okay, the last test we're going to do, and this really only applies to dual pivot bearings, is we're just going to test for the consistency of the downforce. And what we do here is we take the stylus force gauge, it's all set up there now, measuring 0, and we just put this on. Now it's actually measuring 0.97 for the sake of argument. It should be the same tracking force, but I'm not going to set it all up accurately now. What we do now is we give the arm a little, just waggle it around a little bit, just to, you know, let it find its new position. Put it on again, 0.972, so it hasn't moved at all. So you can continue doing that for about 10 times, just put it back in the clip, move it across, 0.974. It's absolutely consistent. Again, you can put it on a different point in the record if you want, and do that. Do need to be careful that the side bias is detached at this point, because that actually can just make a slight bit of difference to the tracking force. It's moved to 0.95 now. You will expect a little bit of variation because, again, the wires, the internal wires that go through the knot, the hole, can actually set themselves slightly differently each time. So you're bound to get a little bit of variation, but this one's very accurate. Okay, so that's checking for the dual pivot bearings. And then lastly, if for some reason you've got a very strong, some arms have a very strong tendency to swing outwards or inwards, it literally kind of runs away. But if that is the case, then say the arm, for instance, swings out violently in this direction every time. What that can be is residual cable twist, so you want to get rid of that in an arm. It happens in transit sometimes. We set the arms up perfectly here generally to have a fairly neutral point at the centre of the record. But in transit things vibrate and you can get a little bit of resettling, so you may need to readjust it. If that's the case, then what you do, if the arm has a tendency to swing outwards, you want to twist the arm or rotate the arm a full turn. In other words, it keeps going a full turn right the way around and back again, and then that will have untwisted the cable, and it should be a lot more neutral. It won't have a tendency to swing out violently anymore. If it's still violent, then maybe the second turn, but that is extremely rare. Okay, vice versa, if the arm has a tendency to swing in violently, then take it all the way around 360 degrees in this direction and back again. To do that, you will need to remove this cable clip because the arm will not go all the way over comfortably. This arm will, but most arms won't. Okay, so in fact this arm is going to run into trouble with the well, you need to remove the counterweight as well, but you'll figure that out anyway. Okay, that's it. This is not an instruction video on how to set the arm up. That's a completely different subject. It's just about actually checking the arm. Thank you very much, and I hope you get anything sorted out. Thank you. Bye for now.